mentioned, I work at BuzzFeed News. I'm one of the photo editors there. We've got a team of 3 of us throughout the world who handle all of our news coverage, and then other coverage is handled by different teams. So the majority of what I do is working with our overseas coverage and our investigations. I do a little bit with our national team and our investigations team. So I'm hiring photographers all over the place all the time. It's never a dull moment for sure. Within that, I also oversee some of our photo essay acquisitions, and I handle pitches all day, every day. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to give you some insight into how to pitch editors like me. The caveat being that this is definitely dedicated towards editorial. Commercial pitches might be handled a little bit differently. They're looking for slightly different things, but this is a pretty nuts and bolts, how to approach people via email and how to make your email stand out a little bit more. So I guess getting right into it, the biggest thing right off the bat before I get into super technical ways to get your pitch shot down is that pitches work. Even if you're told a whole bunch of things, if you can go to the next slide, Jamal, that would be awesome. I've picked up a bunch of things via pitches, most notably Patrick Whitty's project over on the left, which is looking at the refugees that were coming over on boats 2 years ago now. The project on the right was a story with a photographer we'd been working with. He was saying, hey, I've been following this couple. They were split up during the refugee migration. One was in Istanbul, one is in Sweden. They're about to be reunited. Would you be interested in a story showing their reunion? And we said, yes, absolutely, get on a plane. And then if you go to the next slide, there's another example of a fine art photographer actually had been working in the Foxconn factory over in China. It's really, really difficult to get access there. And she sent us an email saying, I have all these photos. Would you be interested in using them? And we said, yes, please. And then finally, there's a quick example by Allison Joyce of photos that she'd done actually between a wire service and a little bit for herself, looking at surfer girls in Bangladesh. So that's just 4 really quick examples of things that we've picked up that were pitches itself. The first 2 were shot exclusively for us, and the second 2 were pickup. So then going beyond that, the first thing before you even start emailing me or thinking about emailing me is to do obviously a little bit of research. Know the editor that you're approaching, figure out if the person that you're emailing accepts pitches, or if there's a better person to contact. A lot of places have a myriad of photo teams. Some photo teams deal exclusively with online content, some deal exclusively with print. Some are divided up between, for instance, ours is divided up between editorial and BuzzFeed itself. So know that you're pitching to the right person. And then make sure that your publication accepts pitches. A lot of publications don't. They like to have things done in-house. And so just be cognizant of that there might be a higher bar of entry and you might need to have a more personal touch in that instance. Most importantly, once you figure out who you're emailing, is figure out why you're emailing them. If they have recently done 12 stories about migration and you have a story about migration, odds are that your pitch is going to get knocked down just because of market saturation. If I had just published a photo essay on Standing Rock, I'm not going to publish another 3. And so within that, be a little bit creative. See if they've done coverage of it, but not a photo essay specific, because they might be looking for something. If something blows up really, really quickly, if there's a breaking news event, obviously that's a slightly different case. Also consider in all instances, if they haven't run a story on it, why might the reasons be that they haven't? It could be that they don't accept pitches. It could be that they haven't seen anything that's good enough, and your project would fill that void. It also could be that there's ethical ramifications in terms of publishing certain kinds of essays, or that they aren't looking for that kind of work. So some publications will not accept pitches from freelancers that work in war zones without insurance. Some publications won't accept pitches from people who are working with exploited children. Some people won't accept pitches if they're looking at either something that has been done by competing things. So if your story has run in the Washington Post or something similar has run in the Washington Post, then the New York Times is probably not going to pick it up. So be cognizant of these nuances before you even bother reaching out, just because that'll up your success rate. Is if you already know you're going to be told no, maybe save everybody some time. If you can go to the next slide. Then here's kind of the next thing. So if you figured out who you're emailing and you figured out, you've got a good feeling that they do accept pitches and that your pitch will fit into a niche or a void that they have, 3 things that you need to consider, and this is by far the most important slide, is like, these are the 3 things that will get shot down or why your pitch will be told no. The first thing is like, do you have an idea? Beyond like the basics of like, I'd really like to go to Cuba. I'd really like to go to Standing Rock. I'm a portrait photographer. I need something that's like a little bit more nuanced than that. There's, as I'm sure you all are aware, a ton of photographers out there. A lot of them have wishes and desires to travel the world. A lot of them have wishes and desires to work on cool projects. During like major news events, it tends to be that everybody will start pitching the same thing. So when Cuba lifted the embargo on travel, or when Standing Rock happened, or if there's major protests that are happening around the immigration ban, everybody sort of looks at this and says, I'd be able to do that really well, which is true, but also consider the fact that like, because everybody else is doing it, you need to have something that is specific to you that is well researched. So Flint, Michigan is a good example. The fact that there's a water crisis in Flint, Michigan is newsworthy, is not particularly visual, but is doable, has been done by almost everybody in the world. So when you look at Flint, Michigan, think about it in terms of like, okay, am I just looking at people who are affected by the water crisis, i.e. everybody, because that's not interesting anymore? Am I going to do a portrait essay on people who are affected? Because like, that might be interesting. Am I going to look at like all the objects that are affected by this water process? That's more interesting. Am I going to shoot it in a way that is like, as though they are fine art objects? That's pretty cool. I haven't seen that before. That is an idea. Then moving on beyond that, okay, if you have this idea about Flint, Michigan, and you want to go and you want to shoot faucets as though they are, I don't know, Pomeranians, like some fine art bullshit, then do you have access to Flint? Have you ever been there before? Do you have contacts on the ground? Do you have people who will let you into their home? If you are traveling overseas or looking to travel overseas, do you have the proper gear? Have you ever traveled to this country? Do you know visas? Do you know fixers? Do you know how to get around? Do you have proper insurance? Do you have proper things? The first question that I'm going to ask if I look at your pitch is like, is this idea cool? And the second thing is going to be, can you pull it off? If you email me and you say, I'd really like to photograph the Red Army of China, I'm going to say, that's amazing. Do you have access? And when you say no, I'm going to say, welp. And like, that's kind of the end of the conversation. Ideas are, it's hard to come up with a good idea for sure, but coming up with a good idea is only the first step. Making sure that you have access and the resources available is hugely, hugely important. Then beyond that, if you have access, if you've been to these places before, you know you can get a fixer, you know you can get a car, it's not a huge ordeal for you to get there, are you able to execute this? And this is kind of where it comes into back and forth between you and the editor of, okay, I have this idea, I have this access, this is the budget that I think I'm going to need to pull it off. This is the amount of time that I think I'm going to need to pull it off. This is some hurdles that I can foresee in terms of either timetables, in terms of access. Like if your subject is only available on certain days, that's something to consider. If there's a tight window of time where you need to have it finished by the end of the summer or before a certain festival or after a certain festival, that's something to consider. Also, like, consider some of the little things of just, if you need to get a visa, will you be tied up in like bureaucratic things? Like, do you need to start that earlier rather than later? Is this something that by the time you shoot it, you're going to have to publish it really quickly and that that's not how you work? Or is it something that like you can sit on it and it can be evergreen? These are sort of conversations that you should be able to address with your editor and with yourself before you approach an editor. Far and away, the pitches that I've picked up that have worked out the best, like, people not only have a good idea, but they have a good idea of how to handle logistics and execution in order to bring that idea to fruition. So it's a lot more research intensive than just coming up with good photos. Cool. So now if you've gone through all of this, you have an idea, you have access, you have execution. I haven't said no to your pitch. Right now it is just chilling in my inbox. So what is the next thing? You probably want to reach out to an editor. One thing that I can strongly discourage is never call a photo editor. The only time I've ever had photographers called me, it's invariably been during breaking news events, and they've gotten very short answers from me. If I haven't followed up on your email, or if something is super pressing, like if when the Manchester attacks happened last week, a photographer reached out and said, you know, they're in the area, they wanted to work on a project doing portraits, would I be interested? That is definitely something that can be handled during email. Even if it is a breaking news event, I guarantee you that any editor who is working on it will be on their email. It's also easier for the editor, if they're going to loop in other teams, to forward an email on versus like following up with a call. Same thing goes with Facebook messages. Unless you know the editor really well and you know that they chat on Facebook, it is much better to email because you can't loop people in on Facebook as easily, and some people don't mix their like work accounts with pleasure accounts. So it's always, always, always email, never call. Even with your emails, like make sure that you're keeping them short. I have right now in my inbox approximately 45 pitch emails from the past week. If any of those are longer than 4 paragraphs, that I'm not reading it past the first paragraph. I'm probably not. It could be super interesting, but just in terms of time, keep in mind that this person is reading a lot of emails all day long. So keep it very, very short and to the point. Then for your help, I put in some sample emails. So if you want to go to the next slide, Jamal. Okay, he is either not there. But next slide, I've got like a basic email of what would be a good pitch email for somebody who hasn't worked with me before and maybe isn't working on a project in specific, maybe has just moved to a new area, or it's just come to their attention that like I actually do take pitches. So this is probably the most common email that I like to get, and that the least common email that I reply to. So I'm a photojournalist based in Minneapolis. I saw that BuzzFeed has been publishing stories from the Midwest and would love to work with you at some point. This is a great email for a few reasons. One, like I know right off the bat where you are. I know that you are aware of our style of work. And I'm probably going to check out your website and put you into our Rolodex if your work is really good. I love getting emails from people all over the place who are just saying, hey, I might not get a chance to reply to them, but this, and even though this isn't like an exact pitch, like this is a good start, just so that way, if I am looking for somebody in Minneapolis, I'll remember, hey, Jeff emailed me that one time, or I'll just search my inbox Minneapolis and see what comes up. So think about that in terms of when you're emailing editors, of like what keywords are going to be searchable in your inbox and what's going to make you stand out. It's not just your images, it's also like how findable are you? Then if you go into a little bit more nitty gritty, there's another slide with another email. Next slide, please. I don't have control over my own slides. Sorry about this. Okay, this is the least favorite email that I get. I just wanted to let you know, I'm happy to go to Standing Rock if you need someone. I'm based in Brooklyn. My website is Photo is Cool. Sincerely, Oliver. I'm gonna look at this and be like, great, awesome, delete. Just because, especially for big events like Standing Rock or big events like this, Reuters is already there, Getty is already there, AP is already there, there's 100 other freelancers that are already there. If you are in Brooklyn, unless you have an idea, I am not sending you from Brooklyn to Standing Rock. Like that is way too much of a wild card. This is definitely the start of a conversation. Like a pitch email should be considered the start of a conversation. But to me, like this is a conversation that's going to go nowhere. You already look unprofessional. You look like you're going to get there and be told and basically say, now what? And if I'm getting something, if I have a bunch of pitches on the same topic, I'm going to go with like the best one, not in addition to like the best work. So with the rare exception of if somebody was a world famous photographer and they said they were going to Standing Rock, maybe I would reply to it. But on the whole, I am probably going to look at it and say, we can do something else. Next slide. All right, so this is one that is a little bit better. This is, Dear Kate, I'm at Standing Rock now taking assignments and working on a story specifically about cooperation between Native Americans and locals in town. Here's a light box and I have a wider edit available. Let me know your thoughts. I'm here for another 2 weeks. Awesome. I'm gonna look at this, and this email is super useful to me for 2 really simple, obvious reasons. One, if I wanted to assign something that is not related to Native Americans working with locals, I know how long you're in time and that you're taking assignments, and I can pick you up from that and give you a call and say, hey, we're sending a writer. Would you be interested in teaming up with them? This is our day rate, da 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 da. Or I can say, you know what, that angle sounds great. We're not sending a writer, but we'd like to do some kind of coverage. I'll take a look at your lightbox, and if the work is good, like reach back out and say, okay, this looks like something that's worth pursuing, and we'll kind of dive into it from there. As you can see, like this email is less than a paragraph. It's super quick. It's super to the point. You don't need to give me the entire synopsis of what's going on between Native Americans and locals. If I am curious and interested and your pictures really are holding it, I'll reach out to you and we'll start the conversation from there. If you think that there's a really, really important like project synopsis that needs to be covered, attach it as a PDF or include it in the lightbox. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the email, because the email should be considered like a gateway into the conversation, not the entire conversation. All right, so Chelsea is in like good graces right now. Then if you go down to the next one, this is a variation on the last email, but this isn't for stories that are like a little bit slower moving, or if you're working on a personal project that isn't tied to a specific breaking news story. So within that, like say where you're based, say that there's a story that you've been working on, and then you have a wider edit available. I always encourage people to say where they're based or where they're traveling, just because things sometimes pop up that are unrelated. So it could just be that I happen to have an assignment in Minneapolis, and if I've never worked with you before, I don't know where you are, and I'm just gonna be like, oh yeah, a pitch, like da 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 da. Again, you have to think in terms of like keywords. If I'm looking for a photographer, I want as many ways to find them as possible, including searching my inbox for locations. Then on top of that, like you are telling me a little bit about the story without getting into too many details. I always encourage like attaching light boxes instead of photos, just because the inboxes of editors sometimes are really small. And if your photos are taking up more than say 5 megabytes, your email might get deleted just because the editor is locked out of their inbox. This has happened in some of the places that I've worked in the past, and pitch emails are usually the first ones to go because they're very big and they're non-essential. So always attach a lightbox. If it's a project that is in progress or incomplete or totally completed, that's not completely relevant to the story. It's always good to know like if you have an opportunity to expand it out further, but mostly in these sort of I'm finished, I'm no longer on location projects, it doesn't matter straight away. I'm either going to pick up this story in full where it is, or we're going to talk about next steps on what to do for an edit. So those are kind of the 4 main pitch emails that I get. Ones that are just saying, hey, I'm traveling. Ones that are saying like, hey, I'd like to go such and such. You do not want to do those. Ones that are saying, hey, I'm at this place, and ones that are saying, hey, I have this project. So 3 of those are good, and 1 of those is bad. Then, assuming that I write back and I say, hey, this is great. If you want to really make this successful and super, super seamless, details are the next big thing to worry about. This is the second most important slide on this entire deck. First one is have an idea, have access, and know how to execute it. Second is like figure out details. So if I email you back and I say, great, we want to go with this story, we want to do it right away, there's some questions that I may either make assumptions on, or I may hope that you don't ask, or that you should advocate for yourself on. So the first one is like a timeline. If I need these photos immediately, or if I need these photos in like a month from now, is really important for everybody to be on the same page of what's the urgency. The next thing is like a contract and what rate you're going to be working out. Rate is usually obvious, like you want to know how much you're getting paid, but contract is also important of like whether or not you can resell these photos, whether or not this is an exclusive pitch, whether or not you're keeping the copyright or somebody else is taking the copyright. I would encourage, as soon as the person says yes, to figure out what the contract is, so that we're all on the same page. And it's not that in 6 weeks, when you're really invested in the story and I'm really invested in the story, you find out that like I'm fully buying out all of your rights in our contract and the whole thing falls apart and we both really kind of hate each other. So figure out your contract right away. Same thing with embargo and exclusivity. If this is something that I want just for me, you can usually negotiate a higher day rate versus like if you're going to be selling this to a bunch of people and then I'm going to kind of want a deal. And the last thing is publish date, which is like related to shoot date in some regards and not related in others. if this is an evergreen project that I can publish anytime between now and December, I'm going to be much slower to respond to emails, and it's going to be a more laid back pace, versus if I want to publish it tomorrow, I'm going to expect that like you're on this pitch, I'm on this pitch, we're making this pitch happen, and we're doing it super quickly. So those are just 5 things that like in the follow-up email, as soon as I say yes, like you should be at least prepared to enter the conversation of like, okay, what's the timeline? What's the money? What are the terms? And that should be right off the bat. And if the photo editor doesn't bring it up, like, don't be afraid to bring it up for yourself. Like it definitely is better for you to do that than for assumptions to be made and for things to get messy down the line. So that is all the basics. So that's in terms of like pitching me, those are things to consider. I'm getting a lot of emails. I want things to be like super short, super to the point. And for you to have like a level of like professionalism in this, and so that we're both on the same team. Then kind of for your reference, if I'm looking for photographers, if I'm pitching stories, or if I'm assigning something, just so you know, like this is kind of how you can get on my radar. The first one is like you're already in my Rolodex. You've either sent me an email saying like, hey, I'm a photographer wherever. This is my newest work. Even if you're in my Rolodex, even if I've hired you for 100 assignments, it is, if I haven't talked to you recently, it is still worth sending me an email just as like a, hey, this is what's up. You don't need to do it more than every 3 to 6 months unless you've got something really, really big that's happened in your life. And if you've relocated, that's another time to send all your editors an email and say, you know, this is what's happening. I'd also encourage you, like if you're visiting a city that you know an editor is based in, to reach out and see if they've got time to meet for coffee. That can be a nice way to put names to faces. If I've seen your email a few times in my inbox and then you say, hey, I'm in town, that's something for both of us to chat about versus versus me just being like, oh, you're a name in my Rolodex. I don't know how you got here or why. The next thing is like if I need photographers quickly, I'll either do cold calls from Blink, LinkedIn, or recommendations. If you don't know what Blink is, I would strongly encourage you to get on it. It's sort of like LinkedIn for photographers is like an easy way to describe it, but you can set it up so that it has your location, it has your portfolio. I know a lot of editors use it across teams, so that way they can send notes back and forth if we've worked with this photographer before, this photographer has the training that we need them to have. It is also by category. So if I'm looking for like an architecture photographer in Boston, I can narrow down photographers that way. So it's a tool that's definitely becoming more popular and more widely used in newsrooms. So I would encourage everybody to get on it and keep it updated if you can. Like it doesn't have to be every day you're logging your location, but it can be like if you're going to a new city and traveling and you want to pick up assignments there, that's a good way to do it. Or just every few months, just be like, yeah, I'm still in Boston. And Blink is a tremendous resource in that way, and that like you can also find photo editors. Okay, so next slide you can skip. Making yourself findable, like that's just something that is broad good advice. In addition to your email, like if you in your email aren't saying where you're based, absolutely 100%, 1000% have it on your website that you're based, so like wherever. If you tell me that you went to college in Indiana and that's like the only mention that you have of your location, I'm gonna assume that you're in Indiana, and the fact that you relocated to Montana is gonna be very irritating when I reach out and call you. Same thing is like if you travel a lot, if you're not based in any one location, say where you are at that point in time. A few photographers will use Blink for this. A few photographers will say right on their site, you know, based in New York, currently in Barcelona, or whatever the case may be. Same thing with email forms. Do not use email forms. I cannot tell you how many editors I know who straight up will not contact photographers if they have an email form on their site. So this is a public service announcement on their behalf and on your behalf. Email forms are not going to get you anywhere for the sole reason that like a lot of us, because we get so many emails, spend a good amount of time searching our inboxes for keywords. And if I've sent an email to you via a form, you're not in my inbox and it's very hard to find you again. If a editor reaches out to you, you can skip the next slide as well. Make sure that you find out like what is working in terms of their market, like in terms of your marketing plan. Find out how they found you. This is just a quick list of some of the places that I look for photographers at. Blink I've already mentioned. Facebook I'll usually go to for recommendations or friends of friends. Instagram and Visura and Photo Museum and Visura in particular are portfolio sites that you can have some of your work on, and editors will go to them to either find projects in whole, like if I'm searching for a project on Venezuela or a photographer that's recently been to Venezuela, I'll check out Photo Museum to see who's published there recently. Same thing with Visura, if I'm looking for something that is like on transgendered kids, or if I'm looking for something that's like a little bit more fine artish on like Europe, I'll like Google in Visura and be like, who's been photographing in Greece recently? So these are just more ways for you to be found. It's also more ways for you to connect with editors and have a productive conversation before you even get to the pitch process. So that way you have a sense of what they're looking for and they have a sense of who you are. And then the final thing that I tell all photographers and all people generally is don't be an asshole. Even if I reject you on this pitch, even if it like the pitch falls through at like week 7 over contract details, this is a marathon, not a race. I'm not going to be at BuzzFeed forever. You're not going to be freelancing forever. We're going to run into each other again. I recommend photographers for people all the time at different publications, and they do the same for me. And so like, if you're going to burn the bridge with me, it's like a pretty small ecosystem that word is going to get out. So that is the basics of like how to pitch and how to get in editors' good graces. Are there questions? I'm not quite sure how to answer questions, actually.
Awesome.
Oh, yes, here we go. Okay.
Yeah,
I got it.
A number of good questions here.
Yeah, these are really good. Okay, so one of the best one is just right off the bat. One of the best experiences that I've had working with a photographer on a project is when I send people out and I say, we just want to get portraits of somebody, and they come back with the really basics of what I wanted was, just portraits. And then they're also like, I decided to like shoot them with this cool light, or I decided to shoot them on film because I wanted to see the look, or like the story really like had this very film noir feel to it. So I went with that. Recently we worked with John Lowenstein on a project in Chicago, and we were photographing family members of guys who'd been falsely accused of various crimes and incarcerated for a long period of time. So this was a story that all the action had happened 20, 30 years ago. There wasn't anything to photograph. We couldn't get into the prisons. A lot of the families were super skittish, and John took a film camera and went out on the streets and shot all these Polaroids and came back and said, what if we shoot it in this way that's like a little bit grittier and like focuses more on the place? And that was awesome. That was something where it was like, it could have been really boring where it's just like, a nice Chicago street with nice light. And he turned it into this thing that looked really masterful and really suited the mood of the overall piece really well. One of the worst experiences that I've ever had, honestly, like things go bad usually for a variety of reasons. It usually comes down to the idea of either somebody hasn't handled logistics properly. So when we get to the place, either like access that we thought we had, we don't have anymore. Visas that we thought we had, or that we didn't think we need, didn't work out. On occasion, like it's direction that I thought that I gave properly and there's a miscommunication. This especially will happen if there's a language barrier where I say, I need 1, 2, and 3, and they hear, I need 1 and 2, and if that falls apart. I would say most of the worst things that have happened have come down to like either bad communication or bad access. Bad access you can't do anything about. Bad communication you can. So always ask questions. Always get things in writing. That way all of you are working off of like the same page where you can go back and be like, no, but this is what was said. And that also goes for like contracts and rates, where if there's any problems later down the road, or if that editor leaves for whatever reason, you have something to refer to and say, this is what we agreed upon. I hope that answers that. Attaching photos, don't attach photos unless they're very, very small. Attach light boxes if you can, like if you have a photo shelter account or a Dropbox account, like something that's external that they can click on. I would say you want to attach like 1 or 2 photos if they're good, just to give like a sense of it, but make sure that they're very small, like under 500K. They're not going to be looking at them for like the strongest image quality. They're going to be looking at them with the idea of like, is this a good image, which you can usually tell from a thumbnail. And then if they need to look at something bigger, they'll reach out and ask. I hope that helps. It's very strange not being able to have direct feedback. So next question. What additional skills do photographers need to make the leap into commissioning and photo editing? That's a good question. A lot of time, a lot of editors kind of wash up here in a way, in that you start working with photo editors and you start developing your eye and you start knowing what projects are out there and what photographers are working on it. And so in that way, having a good sense of where the photo community is at and where the photo community is going is hugely helpful. Some of the things are helpful across the board. So being very organized, being able to manage people who are far away, being able to work quickly and make selects very quickly. A lot of times photographers will send in edits that are 20 or 30 images, which is really nice. Sometimes they send in edits that are a few hundred, and then you have to edit those down to 20 images very, very quickly. So mostly the biggest thing that you can do is have a good eye and have a good sense of the community. And a lot of that is picked up as you do it. So my boss and I joke that this is something that is more like an apprenticeship than a actual, you can't really be trained for it or go to school for it. You just have to do it. I would say if you're looking at doing it, talk to other photo editors and talk to photographers about what editors they've liked working with and start making relationships that way. Yeah, it is also an industry that you can break into by freelancing, which I think is how the majority of us have gotten into it. So you start out freelancing for a photo editor, or you start out freelancing for a book project or working with a photographer on a project that they're working on, and it kind of goes from there. When I was first starting out, I was freelancing at New York Post and TV Guide, and then I was freelancing with a photographer, helping him with his archive. And those were all really good experiences of okay, these are photos that other editors like and that resonate with people, and these are less so. And then
yeah, so I think the last question there by Eric Landon, I think you answered that already as far as what to pitch. So Eric, if you missed that particular section, definitely feel free to rewatch this. The replay will be available 5 minutes after this has aired. Yeah, and so I think one probably final question would just be, where do you see photojournalism going as far as other opportunities for people to do photojournalism besides pitching to the standard publications like the Times or BuzzFeed?
Yes.
Etc.
Yes. They're not going to be nearly photojournalism, traditional photojournalism is so fucking stodgy that there's a lot of different ways to tell stories. Whether or not they're going to be recognized is a whole different thing. So you have to kind of think to yourself, do I want to win a World Press Award or do I want to tell good stories? If your answer is I want to win a World Press Award, keep pitching. If the answer is that you want to tell good stories, there's a ton of ways to do that now. The whole social media thing has totally changed this landscape, where a lot of people have made their mark through live streams. A lot of people have made their mark through Instagram stories, Snapchat, YouTube videos. Small pop-up shops have started working directly with that. Video is a huge thing. Being able to, I would say a lot of photojournalism is shifting really heavily towards video, for better or for worse. And so within that, if you're able to put together something that is a nice package that suits Instagram stories in particular, or Snapchat streams in particular, that's one way to really start to make a mark. And that's something that people are starting to look for a little bit more in terms of, if we're going to this event, can we pick up somebody who already has this skill set on and knows how to do this and knows how to make these connections. So within that, you almost become a producer in addition to a photojournalist, which I think is a slow shift that's been happening over time anyways, in that first it was just you're a photojournalist, you work with an editor, you go out, you file your photos and your film at the end of the day, and that's the end of that, great, go home. And now it's you've got to pitch a story, you've got to research this whole thing, you've got to come up with access. I'm asking you about fixers and insurance. I'm asking you all this shit that used to just be handled by newsrooms before and now is handled by the individual. And that is becoming the producer to your own mini documentary is kind of the next logical extension of that. So yeah, there are definitely ways to still tell stories. I think that it is also a market where people are also shifting kind of in the reverse, where they're going to like books and grand scale projects. So you look at like what Matt Black has been doing for a long time with like his Geography of Poverty project, which is this huge sweeping like opus of poverty that he started forever ago, which was picked up by MSNBC and has kind of spiraled from there, where people are looking at these things of, okay, you're not just doing like in and out assignments, you're doing like a topic and you are deeply invested in this topic and people will come to you for this topic. Stacey Krenitz is another example where like she doesn't just do like one project that lasts like a month or 2 months. She does years-long projects and people approach Stacey and say, I want to do like a story on Appalachia, will you go? And she's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, I've been working there for 10 years already. Like I can find something from my archive. And so within that, I think that that's also a shift that's happening in journalism in general, where instead of just reporters covering a region, they're covering a topic and really investing in like, what are the sources in this? And like, what are the people who are involved in this? With our writers, we've got people who are dedicated just to LGBT or just to women's issues or just to like national security. And so they might be based in DC, but they're traveling all over the place following this story, as opposed to being like, well, it deals with national security, but it happened in San Francisco, so our San Francisco people will handle it. Like you really kind of have to ground like deep roots into something if you're not going to go very broad. I do think that there is a big shift away from, in a lot of ways, breaking news photography. So it used to be if you were starting out as a photojournalist, you had to like get good contacts with all of your police scanners and your police chiefs and all of your locals in order to do that. I think now if things break online, if there's, you know, God forbid, like one of these like terrorism attacks, most of the photography right off the bat is being sourced through social media very quickly. So the only time that you really need like a breaking news photographer is if you're working for like a big metro area. So like Philadelphia, New York, Atlanta, things like that. Or if it's like a long scale, like slow moving thing, such as like the refugee crisis or such as Standing Rock, where like you have a little bit of time to get photographers there and for them to get sources. I would say that those would be some of the biggest shifts right now. No.
Cool. Yeah. That's that was a good answer. I thought you were going to talk for like 1 minute and went on for like 5 minutes.
Sorry.
No, that was perfect. No, that was perfect.
This is something I think about a lot.
Yeah, no, this is good. I think that was a kind of a perfect way to end this great talk. I felt like I knew a lot of this stuff because you told it to me, but having you kind of go through it was kind of great. Okay, I think Eric slid in one more last minute question, so we'll let him do that before we head out, because I think it's almost time on the stream. So I guess if you want to, Eric asked, based on your experience, what criteria determines a commissioned project versus a non-commissioned project?
Okay, so a commissioned project is, that's a good distinction. I think that will vary newsroom by newsroom, because that's one of those things that it comes down to semantics, where I would consider a commissioned project is something that like you shot specifically for us. So you came to me with this pitch that you were going to shoot refugees coming off of boats in Greece. And I say, cool, this is ours. Or like we just did one with Sima Diab in MSF boat where she was on this boat, and I'm like, okay, you did this, you shot it specifically for us, it's exclusive to us, I'm treating this as though you were on assignment for me. Versus like a non-commissioned project is something that is all packaged up and pretty. It's like 30 photos that you've got all captioned, you've sent this out to like 60 different editors, and if I pick it up, it might end up on the Huffington Post in a few weeks, it might end up on Daily Mail. It's like, it's not something that was shot exclusively for BuzzFeed. It was, and with like BuzzFeed slant to it, it's something that was shot for you and that is then being like marketed like a product across different things. There's good and bad to both. Like commissioned projects are really nice for everybody involved because we can really get to the heart of the matter. Sometimes you can pick up more expenses. Non-commissioned projects are also really nice because for me, they're really fast and easy, and I can be like, great, that's an awesome project. Like, here's some money and it's on our website. And like, it's easy to like get it out very quickly versus commissioned projects, which are usually a lot more labor intensive.
Yeah, I think that kind of answered that. Makes total sense. So everybody watching either here or on Facebook, feel free to watch the replay. as well as if you have any questions, if there were any issues with the tech or the streaming, because this is definitely our second official live stream. Feel free to email us at hello@creator.me. Anywhere they can find you on social media or anything like that? Instagram, Twitter, where should we push?
You can find me on Facebook for sure. Yeah, I'm not on Twitter really ever. And my Instagram is a nightmare, so.
And then I think you can also just search for her on BuzzFeed as well. Yep. She's always posting great projects there. So if you just type in her name, it'll quickly pop up, and she does. I think you do like a weekly photo series piece, right?
Yeah, we do a weekly roundup of photo essays, and we do pictures of the week. We do a bunch of things.
Yeah, and you're kind of handling all that. Definitely recommend everybody to check them out. She forces me to have to put in extra work because I go to BuzzFeed, and then BuzzFeed takes all my time because I'm looking at photos.
I know. I never look at our homepage for that reason.
Exactly. But yeah, Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, feel free to watch the replay. Feel free to check out her stuff on BuzzFeed and or Facebook. And hopefully we'll have her back on to do another series soon.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Jamal. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good